Welcome to this Tutor to You AQA A-Level Sociology Paper 1 walkthrough. In this video we're going to look at how to answer the 4 and 6 mark questions on the education paper, that is paper 1. The 4 and 6 mark questions appear on both paper 1 and paper 3, and they're either focused on education in paper 1 or crime in paper 3. They are short answer questions and they're marked as 2 marks for each explanation, way or criticism that you give. For example, on a question that asks you to outline 2 reasons for something, you are getting 2 marks for one reason and another 2 marks for the second reason. As these are short answer questions, you should look to write 2 to 3 sentences maximum when answering the question. And as you're going to see in this video, you'll probably spend 1 sentence identifying the way or the reason and a further 1 or 2 sentences explaining how that creates the effect that is asked for. We'll have a look at a sample question here. Now this asks you to outline 2 in-school factors that might affect gender differences in educational achievement. Now in this question there is a cause and an effect. What we're going to do is highlight the cause and the effect. So we've highlighted here in green the cause, in-school factors, and the effect, gender differences. In our first sentence, what we look to do is to identify the cause, the in-school factor, and then in our second and subsequent sentences, we talk about how this one specific cause will impact on gender differences. So we're making sure that we address both parts of the question. So if we think about some in-school factors that might affect gender differences in educational achievement, we might come up with these. Teacher interactions, teachers as role models, the feminisation of education, peer interactions, changes to assessment, or anti-school attitudes. So this might be worth our first mark. Any one of these 6 reasons we can use to identify an in-school factor that has an impact on gender differences in educational achievement. What we need to do now is explain how does it have that impact. What do teacher interactions do to gender differences in educational achievement? How do teachers as role models impact on gender differences in educational achievement? So the first thing we have to do is identify our in-school factor. As you can see, we've identified the in-school factor here on the screen in red. One in-school factor that impacts on gender differences in achievement is role models. Now we need to explain how role models impact on gender differences in educational achievement. And because it's focusing on gender differences, we may want to be specific and talk about who role models impacts on, whether it is boys or girls. So we've highlighted that boys do not have many role models in education, particularly primary education, whilst the majority of the school workforce is female, which gives girls more motivation to succeed as they see education as being for them and they get better grades as a result. We've identified our cause in the first sentence and we've explained how it leads to that effect in the second sentence. Let's have a look at another response. So a second in-school factor is teacher interactions. We're getting 1 mark here for identifying that teacher interactions affect gender differences in educational achievement. But what we need to do to get the second mark is to explain how it does that. Girls have positive interactions with teachers and are pushed to succeed, whereas boys will have negative interactions with teachers, and as a result teachers will expect less from boys and allow them to get away with doing the bare minimum, having a negative impact on their learning. You can see here what we've done is we've mentioned both girls and boys, and we've talked about the impact on at least one of those groups, how boys will have a negative impact on their learning. As you can see, we've not mentioned any sociologists, we've not referenced any research, we've quite simply explained how in-school factors impact on gender differences in educational achievement in 3 sentences. And that's what you're looking to do given the time that you are allocated for these short answer questions. Let's look at a 6-mark question now. Now 6-mark questions, particularly on paper 1, are a little bit trickier. They're less straightforward than the 4-mark questions. This question here is asking you to outline 3 criticisms that Marxists make of the education system. Now the key focus we've got to think about here is making sure that we talk about criticisms that are made by Marxists of the education system. So as you can see, we highlight here criticisms that Marxists make and of the education system. You can see it's slightly more complex than the first question in the fact that not only do we have to talk about a criticism of the education system, we have to talk about it being specifically from a Marxist viewpoint. Likewise, you could talk about 3 Marxist criticisms, but if they're not linked to the education system, for example, if you state that Marxists are critical of capitalism, it wouldn't be credited. We need to make the link between criticisms that Marxists make and the education system. So let's think of some of the criticisms that Marxists make. And the wording is very important here. Myth of meritocracy on its own is not a criticism, but the idea that the education system promotes a myth of meritocracy is a criticism. So you have to be very careful with the wording in this type of response. Another criticism that Marxists make is that it legitimizes inequality. It reproduces inequality as well. It creates a docile and subservient workforce. It is centered on the dominant norms and values of the ruling class, and that it acts as an ideological state apparatus. Now, these are legitimate criticisms that Marxists make of the education system. What we have to do is we have to explain a little bit more of how the education system does this. So let's look at a sample response. Here we've introduced one Marxist criticism of the education system is that it promotes a myth of meritocracy. How does the education system do that? Well, we've explained that promoting the idea that education is meritocratic stops the working class from revolting when they do not succeed, as they have been taught that it is their own efforts that gives them status in society rather than the social connections that the middle class have, which gives them higher status. You can see here the reference to the education system as they have been taught. And we can see that the criticism is that education is promoting a myth of meritocracy. So this would be enough for your 2 marks. Let's look at a second example. A second Marxist criticism is that the education system produces a docile and subservient workforce. How might it do this? This is achieved through the correspondence principle, nice use of a sociological term there, which teaches working class pupils the values of obedience and subservience so they will not question their treatment in the workforce. This is a criticism of the education system. It's criticising the use of the correspondence principle to produce a docile and subservient workforce. A third Marxist criticism is that the education system acts like an ideological state apparatus. That's enough for 1 mark. Now we need to get the 2nd mark, and we need to explain how the education system does this. This transmits ruling class ideology onto pupils, such as hard work and individualism, which means they will not question inequalities in society and conform to social norms and values in the future. As you can see, that is a criticism of the education system. It talks about transmitting ruling class ideology onto pupils. So it's being very specific and talking about the education system. A little bit of exam gold for you here. Decoding the question is vital to securing full marks in the short answer questions. When you look at the question, consider what is the cause that the question is looking for and what is the effect, and make sure that in your answer you address both the cause and the effect. That concludes this Tutor to You A-Level Sociology Paper 1 walkthrough on 4 and 6 mark questions that appear on the education paper. Thanks for watching.